the United States is the most powerful country in the world. But what shaped U.S. military spending over the past 70 years? From Korea to Vietnam, Afghanistan to Iraq. And now, the world is facing intensified war between Russia and Ukraine, the Israel conflict in the Middle East, and rising tension in the Pacific Ocean. How will the United States of America deal with these challenges? Today, I'm walking you through a visualization on U.S. military spending and its ebbs and flows. We'll start when the U.S. was a sole superpower, but we'll end with questions whether the U.S. can maintain its supremacy amidst cheap drones and artificial intelligence. Stick around, and we'll see how all that may change in this decade. Let's start in 1950. World War II has just ended. The U.S. started as a sole superpower with nuclear capability. But this quickly changed. The 1950s was a period of significant change and development within the United States, especially within the military sector. The military expenditures during this decade were shaped by a number of key events, both domestic and international. One of the most significant events was the start of the Korean War in 1950. This conflict, which pitted the forces of North Korea, supported by China and the Soviet Union, against South Korea, backed by the United Nations and led by the United States, significantly increased military spending. The United States, led by President Harry S. Truman, saw the conflict as a crucial stand against the spread of communism and thus committed a substantial amount of resources and manpower. As a result, the military budget saw a substantial increase. In addition to the Korean War, the Cold War and the arms race with the Soviet Union also led to a significant increase in defense costs. With the two superpowers locked in a battle for global supremacy, the U.S. found itself in a race to develop and maintain advanced military technology and weapons. The escalating tensions and the perceived threat of a possible nuclear war led to a surge in military budget. The formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, in 1949, which included the United States and a number of European nations, was created to provide collective defense against the threat of Soviet aggression. As part of this cooperative defense strategy, the U.S. committed to supporting its allies both militarily and financially. The development and testing of nuclear weapons was another major factor contributing to military expenses. The U.S. was in an atomic arms race with the Soviet Union, each seeking to develop more powerful and effective nuclear weapons. The costs associated with the research, development, testing, and production of these weapons were astronomical, contributing significantly to the overall military spending. Despite these pressures, the Eisenhower administration sought to control military expenditures. This led to the New Look defense policy, which prioritized the development and deployment of strategic nuclear weapons over conventional military forces. As a result, while military spending remained high, it was directed more towards specific sectors, potentially leading to cost savings in others. Thus, the 1950s was influenced by a range of factors including the Korean War, the Cold War, NATO, the development of nuclear weapons, and shifts in defense policy under the Eisenhower administration. Now the 1960s sparked a significant change. The first major event was the start of the Vietnam War. This war, which officially began in 1965, necessitated a significant increase in military funding. In 1961, even before the official start of this conflict, the Kennedy administrations committed to increased spending on conventional military forces. In 1962, the world witnessed the Cuban Missile Crisis, a 13-day confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union over Soviet ballistic missiles deployed in Cuba. This event led to a surge in required military readiness. The space race with the Soviet Union was another significant event. The competition between the two superpowers to achieve firsts in spaceflight capability led to increased spending on technology and defense. This was partly responsible for maintaining the military expenditure at a high level of approximately $54 billion in 1963. The development of the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, ICBM, and other missile systems also contributed to the rising expenses, as these new technologies required substantial funding. The escalation of the Vietnam War in 1966 led to a further significant increase in military spending. This trend continued into 1967, as the United States intensified its efforts in the war, pushing military expenditures to approximately $78.3 billion. By 1968, the military budget had reached a level of approximately $84 billion, and it remained at a similar level in 1969. This sustained level was a reflection of the ongoing military and political challenges the United States faced in the 1960s, including the continued engagement in the Vietnam War and constant tension with the Soviet Union. In the 1970s, United States military expenditures showed significant fluctuations correlating with key events and political decisions made during this period. In 1970, the budget stood at $83 billion. However, after the end of the Vietnam War, there was a noticeable decrease. In 1972, spending slightly increased due to the détente period with the Soviet Union. This period was marked by a temporary decrease in the tension between the two superpowers. However, a certain level of military readiness was maintained due to the ongoing Cold War. In 1973, a change occurred that can be attributed to the Yom Kippur War and the subsequent oil crisis. The United States provided increased military aid to its allies in the Middle East during this period. The year 1974 saw a further increase to $89 billion. This was largely due to the development of new military technology such as stealth aircraft. The introduction of advanced technology led to the U.S. aiming to maintain a technological edge over its adversaries. The trend continued through 1975 and 1976. This was sustained into 1977 and 1978 when a new high was reached. The increase was even more pronounced in 1979, reaching $126 billion. This surge was largely due to the Carter administration's decision in response to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. This event rekindled Cold War tensions, necessitating a boost to prepare for potential conflicts. In the 1980s, the United States military expenditures witnessed a substantial increase due to several key events and strategic decisions. The decade started with a budget of $143 billion in 1980 and saw an upward trajectory throughout the decade, culminating at a staggering $321 billion by 1989. One of the main factors driving the increase was the Reagan administration's strategy to outspend the Soviet Union. This approach was rooted in the belief that the United States could economically pressure the Soviet Union and potentially cause its collapse by forcing it to compete with U.S. military spending. As a result, 1981 saw the beginning of a substantial increase. The Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, or Star Wars program also contributed significantly to the rise in cost. Launched in 1983 by President Reagan, the ambitious program aimed to develop a sophisticated anti-ballistic missile system to prevent missile attacks from other countries, especially the Soviet Union. Simultaneously, international developments such as the invasion of Grenada and intervention in Lebanon required substantial funds. The development of new military technology, such as precision-guided munitions, further drove the rise in defense costs. This technology was seen as a way to enhance the effectiveness of the U.S. military and maintain its global supremacy. Towards the end of the decade, with the Cold War coming to an end, there was a slight decrease in defense spending. Despite the diminishing tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, it did not translate into significantly lower defense budget. At the start of the 1990s, military spending was at its peak, amounting to approximately $325 billion. This was largely a result of ongoing defense initiatives from the Cold War era, which had not fully wound down yet. However, the following year, a notable shift occurred. The end of the Cold War led to a so-called peace dividend, a term used to refer to the economic benefit of decreased military spending. The United States was able to redirect funds towards domestic programs. Despite this overall trend towards decreased spending, certain events caused temporary spikes in military expenditures. The Gulf War in 1991 is a prime example. This conflict required a significant mobilization of the U.S. military, leading to a temporary increase in military spending. In the mid-1990s, another trend began to affect military spending: the downsizing of the military and the closing of bases. This led to further decreases in defense spending, with expenditures dropping to $308 billion in 1994 and further to $295 billion by 1995. However, other developments countered this trend to some extent. The development of new military technology, such as unmanned aerial vehicles, necessitated increased defense spending. The need to research, develop, and deploy these new technologies kept costs high. Additionally, the United States military was involved in several humanitarian interventions during the decade, including in Somalia, Haiti, and the Balkans. These missions, while not on the scale of the Gulf War, still required significant resources, leading to increased military spending. By the end of the decade, the budget was still lower than that of 1990. Overall, the 1990s reflected shift in priorities after the Cold War, the Gulf War, and military downsizing. The 2000s represented a whole new era in the military-industrial complex. The September 11th attacks, wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the development of new military technology, increased investments on homeland security, counterterrorism efforts, all ultimately led to drastic increases in spending while the country racked on trillions in debt. In the year 2000, the U.S. military expenditure was at $320 billion. However, the terrorist attacks on September 11th of that year prompted a significant rise in defense spending as the United States geared up its military response. This event led to increased military deployment, both at home and abroad, and a surge in operations and maintenance costs. The budget rose sharply to $378 billion as the United States launched the war in Afghanistan in response to the 9/11 attacks. This war marked the beginning of the U.S.'s war on terror, which necessitated substantial financial resources. In 2003, the military expenditure escalated further to $440 billion, largely due to the onset of the Iraq War. The wars in both Afghanistan and Iraq required significant increases in military spending as the U.S. military engaged in prolonged conflict in these regions. By 2004, the military budget had increased to $493 billion. Part of this increase was due to investments in new technology such as drones, which were becoming more prevalent in military operations. The United States was investing heavily in homeland security and counterterrorism efforts to prevent another event like the September 11th attacks. In 2006 and 2007, military expenditures continued to rise. However, the financial crisis of 2008 had a profound impact on all sectors of the economy, including defense. The crisis led to budget constraints, prompting a focus on reducing defense spending. By 2009, the effects of the financial crisis were being felt, and the focus on reducing defense costs was becoming more prominent. The 2010s began with an expenditure of $738 billion in 2010, which rose slightly to $752 billion in 2011. This initial increase was soon followed by a series of reductions, primarily due to key events and policy changes. One such event was the drawdown of troops from Iraq and Afghanistan. As the United States began to withdraw its troops from these regions, the need for immediate and vast military resources subsided. Another significant domestic policy, the Budget Control Act of 2011, played a substantial role in shaping the defense budget. The act, along with the sequestration, imposed automatic budget cuts across various federal departments, including the Department of Defense. Consequently, the military expenditure witnessed a steady decline from 2013 to 2015. However, the emergence of new threats on the global stage began to reverse this trend in the latter half of the decade. The rise of ISIS and the United States' decision to renew its military intervention in the Middle East. Similarly, increased tensions with Russia and China also escalated the defense spending. As these nations invested heavily in their military capabilities, the United States found itself compelled to follow suit to maintain its strategic edge. Furthermore, the development of new military technology also had a profound impact on military expenditures. As the nature of warfare began to evolve with advancements in technology, the United States started investing heavily in areas such as cyber warfare capabilities. This shift in focus towards new military technology was reflected in the increased defense spending, which reached a decade high of $734 billion in 2019. Overall, the United States military expenditures in the 2010s were not only a reflection of the country's defense strategies but also a testament to the evolving nature of global conflicts and the increasing importance of technological advancements in military affairs. In the 2020s, the United States military expenditures have seen significant fluctuation, influenced by various key events and necessities. The decade began with a budget of $778 billion. This was a time when the country, along with the rest of the world, was grappling with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. The subsequent year, 2021, witnessed an increase partly due to the escalating tensions with China and Russia. The geopolitical dynamics of this period required heightened defense readiness, which inevitably drove up defense spending. The need to stay ahead of potential threats and maintain a robust military presence was imperative and resulted in a higher allocation of funds. In 2022, the military expenditure saw an even steeper rise, reaching $876 billion. This surge was influenced by the development of new military technology. The advent of artificial intelligence and hypersonic weapons necessitated an increase in defense spending. These technological advancements called for extensive research and development, testing, and deployment, all of which entail substantial financial investment. The year 2023 marked an increased focus on space defense, particularly with the creation of the Space Force. This new branch of the military required a considerable allocation of the defense budget to establish and develop its operations. At the same time, the U.S. military provided support for Ukraine in its conflict with Russia. In addition to direct aid, the U.S. spent billions on replenishing older ammunition stocks. The year 2024 is already seeing a continued boost in the defense budget, and 2025 is already seeing substantial requests by the presidential office. The estimated budget for 2025 is now at $850 billion. The United States' commitment to maintaining a formidable defense system and ensuring national security has been evident in its military investments throughout this decade. So let me also ask you, when will the United States military budget hit the $1 trillion mark? It's a substantial cost, but it is the price the United States is willing to pay. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please press the like button. Also share your comments, I want to hear from you. What will happen when AI fly fighter jets more advanced than the F-22? What happens when swarms of drones patrol borders to maintain the peace? Will humans even be in charge of the button that determines mutually assured destruction?